Hello everyone, a very good morning. Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep and welcome to the daily Hindu analysis. Before we begin, don't forget, our Target Prelims 2023 crash course is going on live on our YouTube channel. We have already completed Indian economy, Indian polity and environment and ecology. And starting today, we shall begin with science and technology sessions where Rashesh sir is going to discuss all the important current affairs topics of the last 1 year through MCQ based discussions. So do catch the session live at 7:30 p.m. today, live on our YouTube channel, and also take a look at the remaining schedule for Target Prelims 2023. We really hope you make the full use of the free crash course that has been provided for you. Now let's begin the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at the topics we're going to cover today. In today's newspaper, in the Delhi edition, we actually have a number of interesting and important articles. I have chosen 3 big columns for a detailed analysis. They are from page number 8, 9 and 10. They deal with various subjects like Indian economy, international relations, polity and internal security. So let's have a detailed discussion on these topics so that it will help you both in prelims and mains. And after that, we have a number of prelims related topics. So please don't go anywhere because at the end of the session, I'll be covering all these small articles which can be very, very important for your prelims. So just stay with me for the next 65 to 70 minutes. I promise to cover all these articles in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. In return, all you have to do is support us by pressing the like button, by sharing the video with other aspirants, and by subscribing to our channel. And also don't forget, we have a quiz on our Telegram channel as soon as the session ends. So do head to the Telegram channel to take a quiz on all these topics. So let's begin with the first article from page number 8. The article is related to Indian economy and it specifically deals with India's civil aviation sector. As you all know, another Indian airline has crashed and failed. I made a mention of this yesterday as well. We spoke about how Go Airlines or Go First, it was previously known as Go Air. This airline has filed for insolvency and bankruptcy at the National Company Law Tribunal. Yesterday in the prelim section, we spoke about the NCLT in detail. So today let's examine this crisis. Let's understand why exactly Go Airlines has failed. And more importantly, focus on the problems that are facing India's civil aviation sector. This can be a very, very important topic for your mains under Indian economy. Because see, the Indian aviation sector holds a lot of promise. There is tremendous potential in India's civil aviation industry. But despite this, the sector is plagued with many challenges. And we have seen multiple airlines fail in India. This is not the first time that an airline is failing in our country. In the last 30 years, we have seen multiple commercial airlines crashing to the ground. In the 1990s, we had the Damania Airways and later NEPC Airlines, which crashed. Then Air Deccan, started by Captain Gopinath, which was quite popular for its low-cost options, also crashed and failed in early 2000. Then came Air Sahara and its spectacular failure. There are other smaller airlines like Paramount and flamboyant airlines like Kingfisher, which introduced luxury air travel in India, eventually crashed and burned. And finally, the most reliable airlines, Jet Airways, also crashed. And now we have Go First, which has also filed for bankruptcy. And this indicates the state of India's civil aviation industry. Now, if you look at Go First has cited several operational constraints and financial constraints as the reason for suspending its operations. Go Air gave out a public statement blaming P&W or Pratt & Whitney, which is an engine manufacturer, for Airbus A320 Neo aircraft. This was the primary aircraft operated by Go First. Most of these flights had to be grounded by Go First because the engines had developed problems. And according to the allegations made by Go First, the engine manufacturer P&W or Pratt & Whitney, which is a major global engine manufacturer, was not meeting its service and contractual obligations, and it was not repairing the engines and supplying new engines as promised. But P&W has dismissed these allegations. So either ways, it is very clear that Go First was dealing with operational problems and there was clear financial problems as well. So in this context, we need to dive deep into India's civil aviation sector and understand what is the promise of India's aviation industry. Because every now and then we read these spectacular reports, usually brought out by the government of India, saying that India will become the civil aviation hub, that India has tremendous potential to emerge as a global leader in civil aviation. So on one hand, you have these kind of flamboyant, spectacular reports, but on the other hand, we see airlines failing repeatedly in our country. So why is this happening? Why do you see this dichotomy? To understand that, we need to look at the overall issues affecting our aviation sector. If you look at Indian aviation, J.R.D. Tata, whom you can see in the image, he pioneered India's civil aviation starting right from 1930s. He is considered as the father of India's civil aviation. J.R.D. Tata envisioned India as a leading civil aviation hub when he championed Air India. But today, India's civil aviation industry is very deeply affected by several operational and financial problems. Now, if you look at Air India itself, it's another sad story. The public sector enterprise, until recently, was incurring tremendous losses. It was known for its inefficiency. It was known for its poor service. And eventually, it had to be bought out by the Tata Group again. Air India went back to the Tata family after the government privatized Air India. But still, the problems plaguing Air India has not been addressed. There are passengers who are still waiting for their refunds. Service quality has not improved. Air India has recently placed a mega contract with Boeing. It has ordered hundreds of aircraft, which is seen as one of the world's biggest aircraft deal. So on one hand, you see these mega contracts, big announcements, and a lot of projections, positive projections by the government. But on the other hand, we see our airlines performing very poorly, offering very poor service to the customers. As Shashi Tharoor once said, flying economy class in India has become a cattle class journey. Despite the controversy the statement triggered, it is quite true because the service offered by Indian aviation industry is extremely poor, extremely inefficient, and there are severe operational and financial problems plaguing the industry. But India being such a large country, a populous country with tremendous tourist potential and business potential, there is great opportunity for civil aviation. In India, domestic tourism is extremely strong. We also attract a lot of international tourists. So naturally, civil aviation should boom in a country like India. India is a fast-growing economy, one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. There are tremendous business opportunities as well. So ideally, our civil aviation industry should be flourishing with multiple competing airlines. But now we are witnessing a situation where it's almost turning into a duopoly. You have Indigo, which dominates the Indian airspace, along with players like Air India and few others, maybe Vistara, SpiceJet to an extent. But rest, they've all fallen, collapsed, and you see this consolidation happening in the aviation industry. So many analysts predict even a monopoly to emerge, led by Indigo. But some say it could be a duopoly with Indigo on one side and the Tata Group on the other side, with Vistara, Air India and the others. But here I'm not focusing on the private business aspect of it, but we are focusing on the aviation sector itself and the regulatory problems and the policy related issues that affect India's aviation sector. If you look at the government projections, it paints a very, very positive picture. Just look at this infographic. There are millions who find jobs directly or indirectly in the civil aviation industry. It's estimated that around 55 lakh jobs have already been created through the civil aviation industry, both direct and indirect jobs. This is expected to further increase by 2040. It is expected that India will add hundreds of passenger aircraft by 2040, and the whole industry is expected to grow. Passenger traffic is expected to grow to 1.1 billion per year by 2040. To facilitate this, the government also is doing its bit. The government has come out with various ambitious schemes like the Udan scheme. It's one of the flagship schemes of the Modi government. Udan stands for Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. It was launched in 2017 to promote regional connectivity at an affordable cost. The primary focus of Udan has been to connect the smaller cities, the tier 2, tier 3 cities, and provide affordable air travel and thus improve regional connectivity in the country. Udan scheme has seen a lot of success. It has helped in reaching out to several remote areas in India. Domestic traffic in India has boomed in the last 10 to 15 years. But despite all these positives, despite all these projections, our airlines are suffering, right? So that is the big question. What's really happening in the aviation industry? So let's try and address this by looking at the writer's argument, and we'll also go beyond the article and pick out some important assessments from several experts. The writer's biggest concern here is that most of the airlines are mismanaged, and the government, which is supposed to regulate the industry, is not doing its part efficiently. So due to this poor regulation from the government and the poor management by the airlines, it's the employees, the crew, the pilots, and more importantly, the passengers who are suffering. Now see, Go First shut down all of a sudden, gave a very short notice that it is suspending operations for the coming few days. So imagine what will happen to the passengers who had booked their flights. They would be stuck in different places. Their travel plans would be completely derailed. Their money may not come back. Go First owes around 11,000 crore rupees to various banks in the loans that it has taken. So it's highly unlikely that Go First will be able to refund all the passenger tickets. Think about the employees, the ground staff, the crew members, the pilots. Their salaries were delayed from several months. Going forward, obviously the employees will lose their jobs, whereas the owners and promoters who would have committed a lot of mistakes would not be held accountable. A classic example here is Kingfisher Airlines that was spearheaded by Vijay Mallya, who today is an economic fugitive who has run away from India after duping Indian banks. Even though he championed luxury air travel and Kingfisher Airlines made a name for itself, eventually the mismanagement, the inefficiency brought the company down and the owners and promoters got away with it. There was no accountability, they were never held accountable. And it was the banks which suffered, it was the people who suffered, the employees who suffered, right? And it was taxpayers' money which was lost eventually. So these are some very, very serious questions that come up with regard to transparency and accountability in the aviation industry. The question is, aren't the owners and promoters responsible for these failures? Why isn't the government holding them accountable? In previous incidents, why have the owners and promoters gone scot-free? What is the Ministry of Civil Aviation doing? It is the nodal ministry for the sector. What is the nodal regulator doing? The DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. The writer is asking these questions. He's asking, in the fastest growing aviation market, how come these critical challenges have remained unaddressed? With regard to safety, Indian Airlines have a very poor track record. It's only a miracle that large accidents and disasters have not happened. Every now and then, every week, you read about incidents involving safety issues with aircrafts. You read about the financial stress of airlines. This has increased further after the COVID-19 pandemic because the lockdown and travel restrictions took a huge hit on the revenue of these airlines. But in the last 2 years, airlines have started recovering, but they are still under a lot of financial stress, plus there is a lot of financial mismanagement. The question the writer is asking is, why isn't the regulator conducting periodic and transparent audits? Why isn't the financial health of these companies being checked? Despite these projected growth numbers, why are the airlines suffering? And why do we see these repeated incidents coming up? These are the important questions and concerns the writer is raising. Now, if you look at India's aviation industry, there are some pressing challenges, as I was pointing out. We can broadly divide this into 5 categories. Let's say there is a mains question or even an essay topic asking you to examine the challenges faced by India's aviation sector. I would suggest that you focus on these 5 sectors. The first one is infrastructural issues. Our airports lack the right infrastructure to support exponential growth in air traffic. The metro cities are good enough, but the smaller cities, the smaller airports, right, they struggle with having basic infrastructure. There are frequent delays in flight durations. There are issues in logistics and handling of the ground teams, in servicing, in maintenance, right? There are several challenges arising out of poor infrastructure and inadequate infrastructure. Next is the issue of regulation. See, this is a sector which has multiple regulators from the side of the government. We have the Ministry of Civil Aviation as the nodal ministry. We have the DGCA, the nodal regulator, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. Then we also have the Airports Authority of India that regulates all the airports and operations in the country. We also have Bureau of Civil Aviation Security that regulates aviation security. So essentially, airlines are subjected to multiple regulations. Ideally, we should have had one unified regulator. But due to multiple regulators being present, there are different policies, different guidelines being brought out. That only creates confusion. There is no clarity, no consistency in the policy framework. So many times airlines either don't follow the guidelines at all, or they implement the guidelines the way they want. They give it their own interpretation. So this is something that the government needs to address. The presence of multiple regulators is creating more challenges and problems. It is not streamlining the safety and financial standards of the aviation sector. Other than that, skilled workforce is in shortage. See, aviation industry is very difficult to run. You need professionals, experts, from pilots to ground technicians to engineers to the ground crew to the air hostesses, etc. Right? You need special skills. And India has a shortage over here. The problem is aviation training is very, very expensive. Most of them, they go abroad to, let's say, become a pilot or to pick up basic ground technical skills and engineering skills. These courses are very expensive. Only the rich and the middle class may be able to afford them. The lower classes can never aspire for a lucrative career in the aviation industry. So there is an urgent need here for the government to intervene to create training institutions across different domains in the aviation sector. Make aviation training and aviation related education more affordable so that we raise a skilled workforce which is readily available for the industry. The other problem is the cost. Operating an airline is always capital intensive. Aircrafts themselves cost you millions of dollars, right? The other problem is the fuel, ATF, aviation turbine fuel. It's very, very expensive. And in India, it is the most expensive. Compared to the ATF cost around the world, aviation turbine fuel in India is the costliest because of the high taxes and levies imposed by the government. This is the biggest operational cost for airlines. Along with that, maintenance, regular servicing, handling the labor cost and other operational costs will shoot up the expenditure for the airlines, and thus it becomes very, very difficult for them to manage their finances. They end up borrowing heavy loans from banks. Initially, banks would be happy to bankroll them because the government would be encouraging the further growth of the airline industry. But eventually, these companies, when they incur losses, they won't be able to repay the loans and they will turn into non-performing assets. So the cost structure is something that's very challenging for the Indian airlines to handle. Next is issues with regard to security. Because there are a lot of threats through terrorism and hijacking. India is very vulnerable to these threats. So these security measures needed to create a buffer against terrorism and hijacking increases the cost of operations for airlines. Plus the question of financial security as well. Several airlines have mismanaged their funds, splurged on various unnecessary expenditures, whereas they go short on essential expenditure. The poor financial records and the lack of transparency in their audits is something that raises very serious concerns in the aviation sector. So these are some pressing challenges that have not been addressed. That is exactly what the writer is focusing upon. The writer says there is a deeper malice in the Indian aviation industry. He blames crony capitalism. It's basically a nexus between the government, the politicians, officials, and the big airlines. It's been often noticed that few airlines are often preferred and promoted by the government. There is some kind of favoritism, according to the writer. He says that rich and influential owners and promoters are backed by government officials and politicians and ministers, and they are given a favorable treatment as far as giving permits and licenses are concerned. Government encourages banks as well to keep funding these airlines which are favored by the government. And even if the financial records are not good enough, the banks end up giving loans and eventually they turn out to be non-performing assets. The DGCA, which is supposed to conduct periodic financial audits, even if it comes up with some concerns, it will not address them. For example, the DGCA audit of Kingfisher Airlines had clearly flagged the deep financial stress that the company was in, but still no action was taken. Similar reports were brought up against Jet Airways as well prior to its collapse, but again no action was taken, no intervention was carried out by the regulator. The writer alleges that there is crony capitalism here where politicians, ministers, government officials who are part of these ministries and regulators, they are in collusion with some of the big airlines. There is an element of favoritism where owners, promoters are freely allowed to do anything they want. And eventually when things go wrong, they are let off scot-free. There is no consequences for them, no accountability. It's only the employees and the passengers who suffer. This is a serious allegation, a concern that the writer brings up, and there is an element of truth to it as well. Look at this very, very important point that the writer is making. It's a factual point. If you look at some of the boards of these airlines, the board of directors and governors, these officials, they would have been retired from Ministry of Civil Aviation or DGCA. Basically, this is a vested interest which is getting created. Former government officials who are supposed to regulate these companies, they themselves take up post-retirement employment in these airlines. So there is a vested interest for them to favor some airlines. While they are in the position of regulation, while they are working with DGCA or Ministry of Civil Aviation, right? There is a vested interest here for them to favor few airlines for lucrative job postings in the future. There are several records where former officials who are part of these ministries and regulators have been appointed on these airline boards. This is not a feasible position because it only encourages the tendency where there is a nexus between the government and officials and the airlines. The bigger problem is the DGCA has a minimum requirement for an airline to operate in the country. There is something called as civil aviation requirement. This is a mandatory minimum requirement a company should have to start an airline in India. They should have a minimum capital as prescribed by DGCA. They should have minimum number of pilots, minimum number of ground staff. Essentially, they should prove that they have the ability and capabilities to run an airline. Only then permits and licenses are issued. But the problem is the DGCA is not keeping a check. Even though the minimum requirements are laid out, later on the DGCA doesn't really check the financial health of these airlines. Even though periodic audits are conducted, the health of these airlines is not monitored. It's not checked whether they have adequate pilots, adequate ground staff, adequate maintenance facilities. This is what leads to piling up of the work burden on the remaining workforce, resulting in inefficiencies and delays, and even poor maintenance that could increase the risk of accidents. But the DGCA doesn't keep track of this, and there is no accountability, no transparency in this regard. If you look at the leasing of aircraft in India, the leasing cost is the highest in the world. Sometimes airlines cannot purchase an entire aircraft. Sometimes they lease it from other companies and airlines. But the leasing cost in India is extremely high, again because of poor policies and poor regulation. And there are no examples of DGCA taking strict action against airlines which are coming out with false projections and numbers. Airlines, they often say they have so many staff, so many pilots on their payroll, but in reality, they'll not have the numbers. They wouldn't meet the minimum requirements. The DGCA, despite knowing this, will not take action against these airlines. So these are some very, very important concerns the writer brings up, and he says that there is an urgent requirement for transparency and accountability in the sector. This responsibility falls not just on the airlines, but also on the DGCA, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and the other concerned stakeholders. The writer actually gives a very important suggestion here before ending his discussion. He says that the government should mandate the airlines to set up a corpus fund. They should set aside a certain amount of fund, keep it locked up, so that if the airline were to fail, at least the dues they owe to employees and the passengers can be paid on time. If an airline is shutting down and closing down, employees and passengers, they shouldn't be left in the lurk. That is why the writer suggests a corpus fund for each airline, where mandatorily every airline sets aside a certain part of its fund, it keeps it locked up, so that if the company fails and closes down, at least employees get their salaries and passengers get their refunds. So these are some important arguments the writer makes along with giving these suggestions. So please make a note of this. You can expect a question here, a mains question in GS paper 3. So I hope the discussion was helpful. It was a big topic. That's why we had to pay a lot of attention to this important topic. Now moving on, we'll take up an article from page number 10 related to international relations. The article is dealing with the Washington Declaration that was recently signed between the United States and South Korea. Recently, just a couple of weeks ago, US and South Korea marked the 70th anniversary of their bilateral relations. It's been 70 years of close partnership and a close alliance, a strategic alliance between US and South Korea. To mark this occasion, South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, he traveled to the United States, met with President Joe Biden, and following this meeting, a very, very important agreement was signed called the Washington Declaration. The Washington Declaration provides for nuclear deterrence to South Korea. It deals with securing South Korea from the threats arising out of North Korea. So the US has guaranteed nuclear deterrence to South Korea in order to shield it from the aggression of North Korea. So let's understand this topic in more detail. Let's understand what threat North Korea poses to South Korea. Let's talk about the provisions of the Washington Declaration and understand the implications of this agreement for the region and the world. See, this US visit by the South Korean president, it was prompted because of a recent missile launch by North Korea. I hope you know that since 7 decades, in the Korean Peninsula, we have a standing conflict that's going on. Since 1950s, the Korean War has been going on. Technically, even today, North Korea, South Korea are at war. They haven't ended the war officially through a treaty. So technically speaking, North Korea, South Korea are still at war. So North Korea and South Korea, they have been divided since the days of the Cold War, after the Second World War ended. And the US and the Western countries, including Japan and European countries, they've all backed South Korea right from the beginning. Since many decades, the US has even stationed troops in South Korea. American troops are stationed in South Korea to defend the country against threats from North Korea. On the other hand, North Korea, which is a communist authoritarian state, has been backed by China, previously Soviet Union, and now by Russia. And it even has close links with other rogue states like Pakistan, Iran, etc. North Korea, which has always followed an aggressive policy against South Korea, US, and Japan, it broke away from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It quit the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In fact, North Korea is the only country which has quit the NPT. The Non-Proliferation Treaty prevents the proliferation, the spread of nuclear weapons. It keeps nuclear weapons limited to the P5 countries, the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council. So according to Non-Proliferation Treaty, only US, Russia, China, UK and France, the 5 permanent members of UNSC, only they are allowed to retain their nuclear arsenal. Because these countries had tested and procured nuclear weapons before the cutoff date that was set under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Before 1967, it was only these countries which possessed nuclear weapons. So only they were recognized as official nuclear weapon states, and all the other countries were mandated to commit that they will never pursue nuclear weapons. Most countries have agreed to it. They have given up their nuclear pursuit on their own. But countries like India, countries like Pakistan, Israel, these 3 countries, they have boycotted the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Because India has always felt that it's a strategic need for India to develop nuclear weapons, to shield itself against China and also against Pakistan and other security threats. India saw nuclear deterrence to be essential. So we have said that we will never sign NPT. We have boycotted NPT. Same with Pakistan and Israel. They want to retain the option of developing and procuring nuclear weapons. So while these countries have deliberately stayed out of NPT, North Korea had signed the NPT, meaning it should have shut down its nuclear program. But in 1980s, as the tensions increased between North Korea and South Korea, and also with US and Japan, North Korea quit the Non-Proliferation Treaty and it has proactively pursued its nuclear weapons. According to several reports, China has backed North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. There have been covert secret links between North Korea's nuclear program and Pakistan's illegal nuclear weapons program. In fact, Pakistan's illegal nuclear weapons program that was led by A.Q. Khan was proliferating and smuggling and leaking nuclear technology and nuclear material to other rogue countries like Iran, Libya, and even North Korea. So over the years, North Korea has strengthened itself through its technological capabilities and with support from allies like China, Russia, etc. It has built up its military capabilities and it has not only tested nuclear weapons repeatedly, but it has even tested ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that can reach even continental US. Just look at this infographic here. It will give you an idea about North Korea's nuclear arsenal. It has not only developed and successfully tested short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, but it has even tested and it can even deploy intercontinental ballistic missiles that can travel more than 8,000, 10,000 kilometers. So North Korea easily has the ability to strike not just its immediate rival South Korea, it can even hit at other rivals in the region such as Japan and more importantly, the United States. North Korean missiles can hit not just American islands like Hawaii, but it can even strike continental US. So this poses a serious threat in the region. In the Pacific region, North Korea is a major aggressor. It's a threat to Japan, South Korea and US, and it keeps on conducting these missile tests and nuclear tests to just send out messages to these countries. Recently, North Korea tested the Hongso-8 ICBM, which reportedly is a hypersonic missile, which can travel at hypersonic speeds. So these missiles can strike South Korea, Japan and even US with a very short notice, and it's almost impossible to intercept them. So this has raised the security risk for South Korea. That is the prime reason why South Korea has sought American help, American assistance to build up nuclear deterrence against North Korea. To deter North Korea from launching the first nuclear strike, South Korea has to build up its own nuclear capabilities. But unfortunately, South Korea does not have its own nuclear weapons program. It has stopped its pursuit of nuclear weapons. I'll explain why later. But it relies on US, it relies on American support to build nuclear deterrence against North Korea. So to strengthen this partnership, South Korea and US have signed the Washington Declaration. As North Korea has become increasingly aggressive and it has repeatedly tested nuclear warheads and even ICBMs, South Korea wants this support from US, a guarantee from US that US is going to defend South Korea and build its nuclear deterrence against North Korea. That is the primary objective of the Washington Declaration. It promotes cooperation towards nuclear deterrence between these two allies. Under this agreement, the US has agreed to deploy a nuclear ballistic submarine in the Korean peninsula to act as a shield for South Korea, to deter any potential nuclear attack from North Korea, to prevent the first strike. The US has promised to deploy a nuclear-enabled ballistic submarine, which is not only nuclear-powered, but it will carry nuclear missiles on board. So the US has agreed to deploy such a nuclear submarine in the Korean peninsula to shield South Korea and build up South Korea's deterrence against North Korea. Under the agreement, the two countries will set up a consultative group, a nuclear consultative group, to come up with joint response tactics. How to respond against North Korea's aggression. They'll come up with a joint response tactic for that. The US will also share intelligence with South Korea regarding nuclear threats from North Korea. If North Korea is developing more advanced weapons and delivery systems, the US, whatever intelligence it picks up, will share that intelligence with South Korea. And they will conduct frequent joint military training along with simulated exercises to engage in nuclear war gaming. They will carry out simulated exercises and training exercises so that both US and South Korea are prepared to deal with a potential North Korean nuclear strike. The whole focus of the declaration is to build up that deterrence for South Korea, where US guarantees to strike at North Korea if North Korea were to attack South Korea. Now, coming to the point, why South Korea has not developed its own nuclear weapons. South Korea has remained committed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Is that clear? It has taken a commitment to not develop nuclear weapons under Non-Proliferation Treaty. But a few decades back, when North Korea started its pursuit of nuclear weapons, South Korea also was eager to start its own weapons program. To protect itself from North Korean aggression, South Korea also wanted to have its own nuclear weapons program. This was encouraged by the South Korean government initially, but later it was curbed by the United States. The US put a stop to it. Since US is committed to non-proliferation, it doesn't want the further spread of nuclear weapons. The US put diplomatic pressure on South Korea and ensured that South Korea halts its nuclear weapons program. In return, the US guaranteed protection. The US guaranteed to South Korea that we will deploy our troops, we will give you all the intelligence needed, we'll share intelligence with you, we will even supply weapons, and essentially we will defend South Korea against North Korea. This security guarantee was given by the US to convince South Korea to end its pursuit of nuclear weapons. That is why South Korea does not have its own nuclear weapons program. So now, the focus of this new agreement is on building South Korea's nuclear deterrence, but however, the decision to launch a nuclear strike, if necessary, will lie with the US president. South Korea will not decide whether US will retaliate or not. Now imagine this scenario, this hypothetical scenario, where North Korea might have launched a nuclear strike on South Korea. South Korea has no option to retaliate. It has no nuclear weapons. So under the Washington Declaration, if South Korea is attacked, or even if there is an imminent threat, the responsibility falls on the US to defend South Korea, which means the US president has to make a call whether to launch nuclear weapons against North Korea. South Korea will not make the decision here. According to the declaration, the authority to launch nuclear weapons, American nuclear weapons, will of course lie with the US president. The US is only giving that guarantee that if you're ever threatened with a nuclear strike from North Korea, we will step in. We will launch retaliatory strikes against North Korea, thereby building the deterrence of South Korea. So please understand the significance of this agreement. Essentially, American nuclear weapons will protect South Korea and build its deterrence against North Korea. That is the whole purpose of this agreement. At one point, US had deployed nuclear weapons in 1990s in South Korea, but they were all withdrawn because of the START treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty between US and Russia. After the Cold War ended, as US and Russia tried to denuclearize and reduce their nuclear stockpile, under the treaty, the START treaty, they started withdrawing and destroying some of their nuclear stockpile. So all the nuclear weapons the US had deployed in the Korean peninsula were withdrawn. And since then, South Korea has been without any nuclear umbrella or nuclear protection. So that is why the Washington Declaration has been signed, where US takes responsibility to deter North Korea and build up the deterrence for South Korea. So this has very serious regional and global implications, because if American nuclear weapons are brought back to Korean Peninsula, if the US is deploying nuclear ballistic submarines near China and North Korea, obviously it's going to provoke them. China has already criticized the Washington Declaration. China has said it's an act of provocation from the US. China-US already have a Cold War brewing between them in the Indo-Pacific, in the South China Sea and in the Pacific region. US and North Korea have a lot of hostility between them. All the previous talks have failed. So China and North Korea are likely to counter this. They would retaliate against the Washington Declaration, and you might see more tensions between these rivals in the Pacific. This, of course, will have implications for India as well, because the Pacific, the South China Sea, these waters are critical for India. We have very, very important relations with US and South Korea. We did have some kind of relationship with North Korea, but we have ended all those ties as North Korea is under sanctions. All right? But the support of China to North Korea's links with Pakistan's nuclear program, is something that bothers India. And of course, all these developments, they are of concern to India. India would closely watch these developments. So this completes my discussion on the Washington Declaration. Now moving on, we have an important article on page number 9 that examines the relevance of CCTV cameras in policing, in security and law enforcement. I'm sure all of you know that around the world, CCTV cameras, they have become omnipresent. From our homes to private spaces to commercial buildings to public spaces and infrastructure. Everywhere, wherever you go, at every street corner, right, you find CCTV cameras to be installed. Many of the CCTV cameras are privately owned, but most of them are installed by the police as well, at least the ones present in public spaces. Now, this is where the question comes up. Do CCTV cameras really serve the purpose of improving security? Does it really help in reducing crime? Because whenever the police launch a new initiative to increase the CCTV coverage in a city, the justification they give is that CCTV cameras help in improving security. It helps in reducing crime. This is the justification from the police, the security agencies and the government. But the other side of the question is, does it really reduce crime? Won't it breach our privacy? Isn't there a risk of large-scale surveillance by the state? Couldn't this lead to mass surveillance and targeted surveillance that could violate our privacy and basic fundamental rights? So that is the question, the debate that comes up when you think of CCTV cameras and the increasing coverage of CCTV cameras. Right? One is reminded of George Orwell, the popular author, who writes in his fictional novel 1984, and as well as in another very popular novel, Animal Farm. He talks about state-led surveillance, where there are omnipresent cameras everywhere, where the state is constantly watching, the big brother is constantly keeping a watch in the name of security. In the name of security, mass surveillance is justified that violates privacy, that stifles dissent, criticism, destroys fundamental rights and democracy. So the widespread installation of CCTV cameras is a reminder of the Orwellian dystopian future that George Orwell was talking about. Honestly, I would suggest that you guys read 1984. It's a beautiful piece of work by George Orwell, even Animal Farm. It helps you understand, in a very comical, fictional manner, it helps you understand the impact of state surveillance, the impact of authoritarian governments. One is not arguing that CCTV cameras are not necessary. Of course, CCTV cameras, they do serve an important security purpose. They do help in investigation. They do help in collecting important evidence to crack crimes and cases. There's no doubt about it. Because CCTV footage, it is accepted under India's criminal laws as evidence. If you look at the CRPC, the Criminal Procedure Code, right, it provides for recognition of CCTV footage, and the Indian Evidence Act also recognizes this as evidence. Of course, there are some processes to be followed, some conditions, but Under the criminal laws, we have the CRPC and the Indian Evidence Act. CCTV footage is considered as evidence in a court of law. It even enables the usage of facial recognition technology that is powered by AI or artificial intelligence. Today, police and law enforcement in India and around the world are using AI algorithms to scan through CCTV footages to look out for suspects, to look out for potential troublemakers, to aid in their investigation. So one argument is the increasing CCTV coverage definitely helps in improving security, law and order, in ensuring women's safety, especially in isolated areas during night time. It plays a key role for the police to keep a watch, to keep an eye, and thus prevent crime before it happens, or intervene at the right time, or even aid in investigation after the crime has happened. But the other argument is also equally valid. Now just look at the graphs that I have provided here. It's very, very instructive. There is a study which shows that despite the exponential increase in the number of CCTV cameras in India, Indian cities report high level of crime. Meaning there is no direct correlation between increasing CCTV cameras and seeing a drop in crime rate. That's why many experts, they argue that just by increasing CCTV camera coverage, you cannot solve crime or you can't prevent crime from happening. Reducing crime is related to efficient policing, better law and order, better economic growth. So increasing CCTV coverage is not a panacea, it's not a one-stop solution through which you can bring down crime rates in your cities. The data clearly points to that. Available data says that even though there has been an exponential increase in the installation of CCTV cameras, crime rate remains high in our cities. So this dismisses the argument of the police and the law enforcement that CCTV cameras are needed to reduce crime. There is no direct correlation here. Yes, it is acceptable that it helps in intervening at the right time, it helps in keeping a better watch, it helps in investigation, but however, it raises the question of privacy. Today, privacy is a guaranteed fundamental right under Article 21. Ever since Supreme Court held right to privacy as a fundamental right in the K.S. Puttaswamy case. There are other serious concerns with regard to your fundamental rights under Article 19, Article 14. Right to equality, right against any discrimination, then right to free speech and expression. All these rights could be threatened if there is mass surveillance, which is enabled by CCTV camera footage. Today, police and law enforcement agencies are deploying facial recognition technologies that are driven by artificial intelligence. They're doing this without any accountability, without legal checks and balances. Please understand, India does not even have a data protection law. We don't have a law to regulate artificial intelligence or technologies like facial recognition. There are many evidences to show that facial recognition can go wrong. The technology itself could be flawed. The biases in artificial intelligence could lead to wrong identification of the suspects. The other problem is most of the CCTV cameras, they are of very poor quality, they are not well maintained, and the image quality is not good enough. So it's not a justified reason for the police to keep expanding the CCTV coverage when they can't prove that it is reducing crime rate and when there are serious concerns about mass surveillance and a compromise of your privacy and fundamental rights. That is what the writers are arguing for. So please take a balanced stand on this issue. You can never say CCTV cameras are not needed, it's a threat to individual privacy. That's not the only position you can take. Of course, CCTV cameras, they play an important role in security, in law and order. As I told you, it helps in solving crime, it helps in preventing crime as well. But data shows that at a city level, at a national level, even at a global level, there is no direct correlation between expanding CCTV coverage and reducing crime rate. All right? So there should be a balance. And to strike that balance, to hold the police accountable, to ensure that these footages are not misused to carry out state surveillance or mass surveillance, privacy should be protected. We need a data protection law. We need regulations on facial recognition technology and the usage of AI in scanning CCTV footage. That is what is needed. The legal regulatory framework is needed to hold the police and security agencies accountable if the footage is misused. right? So take a balanced stand on this topic. It could be a very important question in polity or maybe even in internal security under GS paper 3. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's editorials and columns. And now we move to the last part of today's discussion, that is Prelims Bytes. Let's take a look at few small articles that are very, very important for your prelims. Let's go through them one by one quickly. On page number 1, the Hindu carries an image of few tribal farmers who are cultivating ginger. They are sowing ginger in the Araku Valley of Andhra Pradesh. Because of the pre-monsoon showers that most of the country has received, the summer showers, it's a right season for cultivation, and the tribal farmers in the Araku Valley region, they have started cultivating ginger. Now, I would like to talk about Araku Valley, which is in Andhra Pradesh. It's a very important region from a geography and even culture point of view. There could be a prelims question here on the Araku Valley. So you should know where it is located, what is unique about Araku Valley. You can see here in the map that Araku Valley is located near Visakhapatnam over here. It's a very popular hill station a few kilometers away from Visakhapatnam, located on the Andhra-Odisha border. It's very close to the Andhra-Odisha border. Please remember this. It's quite close to the Andhra Pradesh-Odisha border. It's near Visakhapatnam, and it is part of the Eastern Ghat ranges. It's part of the Eastern Ghats. It's a very beautiful location. It's a popular hill station as well, a tourist destination. All right. And it is home to several tribal communities, including the Araku tribes. The Araku tribes are indigenous to the Araku Valley. And coffee plantations can be seen here, which were introduced by the British. The British introduced coffee cultivation here in the Araku Valley, which is part of the Eastern Ghats. And the last point to note is that the region is prone to landslides. There is a landslide risk. The hazard exists at Araku Valley. So please note these key points about Araku Valley. You never know, there could be a geography-based question on this place. Next, on page number 1 and 12, we have a couple of articles related to the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In previous sessions, we have covered enough about SCO. The topic is very, very important because India currently holds the chair of SCO, and we are hosting the SCO summit at Goa. So before the actual leader summit takes place, all the concerned ministers are having their ministerial meetings, and the foreign ministers meeting has started yesterday. The foreign ministers of all SCO member countries, including India, right, have been meeting in Goa, holding discussions on various key topics. So we have an article that mentions that India's foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, met with the Chinese foreign minister to talk about the boundary dispute along line of actual control, as the boundary dispute is still not resolved with China, as the military standoff continues at Depsang Plains and Demchok. India's foreign minister has used the opportunity to talk to the Chinese foreign minister to quickly resolve the ongoing border standoff in the Ladakh sector. India's foreign minister has also held consultations with Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov. Given the Russia-Ukraine war, the impact of Western sanctions and the strategic India-Russia relations, this dialogue is also equally important, where the Indian and Russian foreign ministers have exchanged their views on key topics. And India would also be interacting with all the other foreign ministers of Central Asian countries, which are members of SCO. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. All these are key members of SCO. India would hold very important dialogues with them. And more importantly, it's an opportunity for India to engage with Pakistan as well. Pakistan's foreign minister, Bhutto, the younger Bhutto, is in India, would be participating in the SCO meet. But of course, India has not held a direct dialogue, a bilateral dialogue has not taken place, because India-Pakistan barely have diplomatic relations ever since the major terror attacks happened against India. Since Uri attacks and Pulwama attacks, bilateral ties between India and Pakistan have been scaled down. So Indian foreign minister has not separately met with the Pakistani foreign minister. But of course, as a group, at the SCO, there will be interaction between India and Pakistan. So that is something we need to watch out for. Other than this, during the SCO foreign ministers meeting, India has positioned itself as a balancing power. India has pointed out to SCO members and to the rest of the world how India is part of diametrically opposite groupings. For example, we are part of Western-led groups like Quad, the Quadrilateral. We are also part of Russia and China-led groups like SCO. This in itself is seen as a contradiction by many countries and by many strategic experts. We are also part of other groups like IBSA. We are part of G20. Many see this as a contradiction, but India says this is not a contradiction. This is India's policy of multi-alignment. We align with Western countries. We work with groups like Quad. We also work with Russia and China with groupings like SCO. So India has said that we are a balancing power. We are in that position where we can balance out the rivalries and conflicts between Western countries and Russia and China on the other side. So during these discussions, India highlighted the importance of IBSA. IBSA is an important grouping comprising of India, Brazil and South Africa. It was established in the year 2003 through the Brasilia Declaration that was brought out on the sidelines of the G8 summit. During the G8 summit, the Brasilia Declaration was brought out by India, Brazil and South Africa. These three like-minded democracies, like-minded emerging countries, they signed this agreement to establish the IBSA forum. India, Brazil and South Africa are three large open democracies, three of the fastest growing economies in the world as well. So these like-minded countries from three different continents came together to form the IBSA grouping. Today, IBSA might have lost its relevance to an extent because the same countries are already part of the BRICS grouping. India, Brazil, South Africa, they're already part of the BRICS along with Russia and China. So due to the rising prominence of BRICS, IBSA might have lost its relevance, but IBSA still remains relevant to an extent because under IBSA, there is a lot of important cooperation that takes place between India, Brazil and South Africa. Their primary focus was to cooperate with regard to global financial issues, to deal with WTO trade-related issues, climate change, for example. At Climate Change Convention, India, Brazil, South Africa, they would coordinate their positions through the IBSA platform. They would bring all other developing and underdeveloped countries together during climate change negotiations. They even have similar position regarding terrorism. So on key global financial issues, geopolitical issues, on counterterrorism, climate change, IBSA countries have often had the same position. They even collaborate, work with each other, take up joint projects. They have tried promoting people-to-people relations, that is cultural ties and tourism. They have even set up a fund called IBSA Fund to promote developmental activities and socio-economic programs, not just in their countries, but even in other smaller countries, mainly to tackle poverty, to tackle hunger, malnutrition in poor countries, underdeveloped countries. IBSA Fund was created. IBSA Fund has seen a lot of success. It has even been recognized by the UN. When the Millennium Development Goals were being implemented by the UN gave credit to the IBSA Fund for various developmental projects in several African, Asian and South American countries. In countries like Cambodia, Laos, in Guinea-Bissau, Haiti, in all these poor, underdeveloped countries, even in underdeveloped African nations, IBSA Fund has been used. Even in Palestine, for example, IBSA Fund has been used for developmental activities. So this is an initiative of these developing nations and it represents South-South cooperation. South-South cooperation basically refers to cooperation between developing and underdeveloped countries. In international relations, when we say global north and global south, we are not referring to directions. Global north refers to the developed world, the industrialized countries. Global south refers to developing and underdeveloped countries. So countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, they are leaders of the south. They lead the developing nations, and when they collaborate with other developing and underdeveloped countries, we call it as South-South cooperation. So IBSA has been a key platform for South-South cooperation. It has brought the respective businesses and traders together as well. And more importantly, they even had a military exercise called IBSAMR. It was a maritime exercise, a naval exercise between Indian Navy and the navies of South Africa and Brazil. All right. So these are some key facts that you need to remember about IBSA, which is an important grouping. Now moving on to page number 15, we have an article here that refers to a disaster in Rwanda. Rwanda is an African country, and the country has been hit with floods and landslides. A lot of people have lost their lives, so it's an unfortunate, tragic disaster. But the article makes a reference to an important lake called Lake Kivu. You can see here in the map, in the image, that the flooding and landslides that has affected Rwanda has mainly occurred on the areas bordering Lake Kivu. Lake Kivu is very, very important from a prelims point of view with regard to geography, because Lake Kivu in Rwanda is one of the great African lakes, the African Great Lakes. Is that clear? I'm sure you would have heard about the African Great Lakes, similar to the North American Great Lakes. The African Great Lakes include all these lakes you see in the map in the African Rift Valley. These are also referred to as the Rift Valley lakes, present in and around the East African Rift, where the African continent is splitting due to the tectonic movement that's happening in the East African Rift Valley. So this movement creates these large water bodies, these large lakes, such as Lake Victoria that you see here between Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda. Lake Victoria is the second largest freshwater lake in the world by area. Please remember this. You can also see Lake Tanganyika, a very, very important African lake. It's the world's second largest freshwater lake by volume and depth. It's shared between Tanzania, DRC and few other countries in the region. Then you also have Lake Malawi that you can identify in the map. And you have other minor lakes such as Lake Albert, Lake Kyogo, Edward. Then you also have Meru, Bangvelu, and this is Lake Kivu over here, which is in news. You can clearly see in the map where Lake Kivu is located. All these minor lakes as well are part of the African Great Lakes. Along with the mega lakes such as Lake Victoria and Tanganyika, you even have the smaller lakes such as Albert, Edward and Kivu. You can see Lake Malawi as well, down over here in the Rift Valley in Malawi, and it also drains into Mozambique. Alright, so all these countries that you see here in Eastern Africa, they are part of this drainage basin of the African Great Lakes. The basin includes Burundi, DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, Rwanda, Zambia, Tanzania and Uganda. So please remember these basic geography-based facts. And let me show you Lake Kivu in greater detail. It is present on the borders of Rwanda and DRC. It is shared between the two countries. It's one of the African Great Lakes shared between DRC and Rwanda. It's present in the Albertine Rift, which is part of the East African Rift. Alright? In the same map, you can see an important city, Kigali. Kigali is the capital of Rwanda, where the historic Kigali Amendment was signed to the Montreal Protocol. I'm sure you would have heard about Montreal Protocol that deals with ozone depleting substances that threatens our ozone layer. Right? Ozone depleting substances were phased out through the Montreal Protocol. And this protocol was amended through Kigali Amendment. These negotiations happened at Kigali in Rwanda. Now please take up a small exercise. Read about Kigali Amendment and mention the purpose of Kigali Amendment in the comment section below. Let's see how many of you can get it right. Moving on to the next article from page 15. We have a radical extremist group which has been mentioned called the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys is a far-right extremist radical organization based out of the United States. This group has attracted a lot of controversy. It has even been labeled as a terrorist organization in countries like Canada, New Zealand, etc. Is that clear? It's a right-wing extremist organization. It's a male-centric organization that believes in neo-fascist ideology. It tries to revive fascist ideology of Nazi Germany, that is Hitler's Germany, Mussolini's Italy. It draws inspiration, ideological inspiration from these fascist erstwhile powers. And in the US, this so-called Proud Boys group, which is a radical extremist terrorist organization, has been engaging in political violence and extremism. This group takes a stand against feminism. It takes a stand against minorities, religious minorities. It promotes Islamophobia. It has targeted immigrants. It has targeted LGBTQ community. It takes a stand, a very conservative, radical stand against all progressive values. So Proud Boys has been a dangerous organization in the US, aligned with Republican Party as well, sometimes backing candidates like Donald Trump. But recently, when the presidential elections happened, when Joe Biden won the presidency and Donald Trump lost the elections, during the transition of power, Donald Trump had refused to concede defeat in the election. Donald Trump kept alleging that electoral fraud had been committed. This instigated his supporters and followers, including members of this group called Proud Boys, to carry out an act of insurrection. They engaged in a violent act of insurrection at the US Capitol. At the US Capitol, which is the legislature of the US, where the final vote counting, the formal vote counting process was taking place, Proud Boy extremists, along with radical supporters of Donald Trump, they tried to disrupt the electoral process and engaged in violence. This was an extremist act. So in this case, regarding the US Capitol violence, the ex-leader of Proud Boys has been held guilty. That is why the topic is in news. So from a prelims point of view and from a general awareness point of view, you should know about such radical groups, such extremist organizations. Is that clear? It's a far-right extremist group aligned with fascist and neo-fascist ideology. All right, it targets minorities, women, right? It's a male-centric group. It promotes white supremacy, the supremacy of the white race, the so-called supremacy of the white race, and targets all minorities, immigrants, etc. All right? It has repeatedly engaged in acts of violence, so it's been designated as a terrorist organization by Canada and New Zealand. Next, on page number 16, it's reported that Adani Ports of India will be exiting its port project in Myanmar. Adani Group or Adani Ports has won several lucrative port projects around the world, including the West Container Terminal Port project in Sri Lanka, the Haifa Port project in Israel. All these critical port projects have been won by India's Adani Group, the Adani Ports. Adani Ports was supposed to build a container terminal at Yangon port as well in Myanmar. Yangon is a strategic port of Myanmar facing the Bay of Bengal. It's a vital port in Southeast Asia. So an important container terminal at Yangon port was supposed to be built by India's Adani Group. But because of the sanctions against Myanmar, the Western sanctions, the project has been derailed, and as a result, Adani Group has been forced to quit the project. Is that clear? Myanmar has been committing atrocities in the last 2 years. It's imposed an emergency. The military has taken over again. It's committing large-scale human rights violations. So Western countries have again targeted Myanmar with crippling economic sanctions, and this has hit the port project of Adani Group. From India's point of view, this was supposed to be a strategic project which would give India a foothold, a greater foothold in Myanmar and Southeast Asia. Now, if you look at Myanmar, there are several important port locations. For example, the Sittwe port over here. The strategic Sittwe port has been developed by India as part of the Kaladan multimodal transit transport corridor project to connect with Myanmar and to create an alternate route to India's northeast. Is that clear? As part of the Kaladan project, India has created a maritime link between Kolkata port and Sittwe port. India has developed the strategic Sittwe port. And through the Kaladan river in Myanmar, we have created inland navigation to transport goods into Myanmar and Mizoram so that we can create an alternate route to northeast of India. Next, you have the Kyokfu port, which is built by China. It is seen as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative and its string of pearls strategy to encircle India. China has built the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor as part of its Belt and Road Initiative, or One Belt, One Road project. And Kyokfu port is a critical part of it. This gives China direct access to Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, and it reduces China's dependency on the Malacca Strait. So Kyoku port is a vital port built by China as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. This is the Yangon port, which was supposed to be built by India's Adani group, but now Adani group has quit the project because of the difficulties created by the sanctions. Then Dawai is another major port location. At Dawai, a special economic zone was supposed to be built by India and Japan. India-Japan together as part of their Asia-Africa growth corridor. They were supposed to establish a special economic zone in Dawai. But this project also has been derailed because of the political situation in Myanmar and the sanctions on Myanmar. All right? So the declining Indian presence in Myanmar's critical port projects gives an opportunity for China to step up its strategic presence in Myanmar. All right? So that is what you need to understand from this article. Coming to the last topic, from page 16, we have an article related to India-Russia trade relations. As we have discussed in many previous sessions, India has bypassed the Western sanctions against Russia since the last 1.5 years, and we have been importing Russian oil and gas on a very, very large scale. India has become one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil and gas, as Russia has offered this at a discounted price to India. Today we are processing Russian crude and selling it to European countries as well, right? Now the problem here is with regard to payment. India and Russia have been struggling to pay for this trade. We have imported more than $40 billion worth of oil and gas in the last 1 year, but India has been finding it difficult to pay for the Russian oil. We have tried alternate payment arrangements. For example, we proposed a rupee-based settlement system, a rupee-based payment system. Initially, Russia was looking to accept this, but now Russia has said this is no longer viable because Indian rupee is not fully convertible and India does not have a lot of exports to Russia. Russia does not want a lot of goods from India. Now, what will Russia do sitting with such a huge stockpile of Indian rupees, right? India owes more than $40 billion to Russia in payments, but we can't pay with dollars. It's very difficult because of the Western sanctions. Rupees are useless for Russia because Russia will be bound to purchase goods in India. Russia doesn't have such a requirement within the Indian market. And if all the payment is made in rupees, Russia will sit on those rupees. It will be useless for Russia because our currency is not fully convertible. That is why Russia has opposed the settlement of the trade deficit in Indian rupees, and most likely this system is going to come to an end. As of now, we are settling the payments in UAE dirham. We are using alternate currencies such as UAE dirham to pay for Russian oil settlements. All right. So Indian rupee, which was being promoted by India as an alternate payment route, has been discouraged by Russia because Russia does not want to sit on piles of Indian rupees, which is useless in the international market. Clear? So that is something you need to understand from the last article. So this completes my detailed discussion and analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. Please take up the mains practice questions. It's based on what we have already discussed. I expect you guys to take it up seriously, write an answer and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which link is given in the description below. So this brings my discussion to an end. I hope it was good. I hope it was beneficial. Do let me know in the comments. Like the video as well and do subscribe to our channel. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.